Okay, guys, let's take a look at the 1984 film Conan the Destroyer. It has a 26% on the tomato meter and a 38% on the audience score. It has 60,000, more than 60,000 user reviews. It is certainly rotten by Rotten Tomatoes standards, and it's quite rotten by my standards. But I'm going to have a big caveat on that, and I'm going to say that this shouldn't be thought of as an outright bad film, although it is rotten. If you come into this from the point of view that it is made for kids, it is made for, a very early teenager, perhaps 13 years old, 12 to 13 years old, then this is passable fare, particularly in the early to mid 1980s. I remember being in that age range when this film was released, and I saw it not in the theater, but when it came out on HBO or Showtime, and I knew it wasn't that great. Particularly compared to the first Conan movie with Schwarzenegger from 1982, but it was passable. It was worth watching one time. And the big difference between this one and the 1982 film isn't just that it's more rotten, that it's lower budget. It's a lot campier. It's more of a comedy. It is not to be taken seriously. You might think it is at the beginning, but you get through a few minutes of this and you start to wonder, hey, this director wasn't really taking this serious. Because let's take a look at the 1982 film. The 1982 film, Conan the Barbarian, is meant to be taken 100% seriously. It is not a parody, satire, comedy. It is not some screwball, campy thing. It is definitely meant to be serious, and it has a 66% on the tomato meter and a 74% on the audience score, and it is not made for little kids. It's got some sexual imagery in it. It's got more adult themes. The whole atmosphere is not made for little kids. Now, I did see it when I was 12 years old, I believe. I saw it not in the theater, but when it was, fresh to one of the cable channels, HBO, Showtime, Cinemax, something like that. And I remember really enjoying it. And I remember that my parents really enjoyed it. And it wasn't supposed to be an Academy Award winner. It was just supposed to be Conan the Barbarian. And wow, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he really fit the role perfectly. He came across as a kind of low intelligence barbarian, and it worked perfectly. Now, this film that I'm talking about today, this Conan the Destroyer from 2 years later, this was made by a different director. It has a totally different feel, totally feels more low budget, and you can see very, very obvious flaws in the special effects. I'm going to have a lot to say on that, but let's get right into the audience score. We have one from 5 days ago, 1.5 stars. The sequel to Conan the Barbarian is a disappointment in almost every respect. The musical score is mediocre compared to the excellence of the original score. The story is less involving, more campy, lacking an actor like James Earl Jones. His character lost his head in the original film. There aren't any memorable acting performances, and to appease critics who said Conan the Barbarian was too dark and violent, this was a more child-friendly affair, but that meant that the world also felt a lot less. Yeah, it feels like something pulled from a Saturday morning cartoon, whereas the first film, Conan the Barbarian, it's a straight-up cinematic serious thing. This feels like something pulled from a Saturday morning cartoon in almost every way, except particularly towards the end of the film, there's just a little bit too much sliminess and gore and a little bit too much blood. It becomes a little darker and grittier and nastier at the end, but it's still campy all the way through, and it could have been just ripped off straight from a cartoon version. And while we're on the subject of cartoons, let's just say that there is a sequence in which a wizard turns into a dragon, and that dragon is straight up a cartoon dragon that's been hand painted into this live action film. And I'm not saying, in the modern sense that the CGI is just really bad and it looks like, a cartoon. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying that this dragon was literally drawn into the frames by hand by an animator in a very cartoon-like way. It is straight up mixing cartoon elements with live action elements at one part. And, something that's made for kids, it's not a problem. But there's other stuff like that in this film. The really bad part of this, visual effect wise, is glaring, and it's on the sequence in which the wizard is in his ice fortress on the lake. Now you can see the green screen going on, and there are different layers composited using green screen technology. And at some point, it became very low budget in that you could see that the model that was superimposed upon the green screen, the uh, island fortress made out of ice, it was shaking and vibrating as though it was on a table and it was like bumped by somebody. And there were this whole sequence on this lake with this um, ice fortress on an island. It's all like that. Like you can see like the props shaking and bumping against the green screen, and it's very weird. You have a couple of sequences where you can see some of the falling stone effects where the boulder like stones actually fall through the green screen effect at a couple of points, and it's very cheesy. It's like almost worse than something you would have seen in the mid 70s on a kids TV show. It's almost worse than that, in a lot of ways. And it straight up feels like a kid made production, something made for the kids. Now, when I was 13 years old or so watching this, I didn't look that critically at it. So it kind of, I saw some little shaking effects in the green screen. But when I saw this as an adult just earlier today, wow, I almost laughed out loud, but it wasn't meant to be funny. It was just like such a low budget affair in the visual effects department, and they probably saw the flaw in it when they made it, and they just didn't have time to reshoot it or redo it, didn't have the budget. So it can be laughably bad at times like that, in particular in that one scene with the island fortress made out of ice, and they've got to defeat the wizard to get the gem. And it's really bad. The whole thing is laughably bad. You've got the wizard in a rubber mask, like a lizard man type of mask, fighting Conan. And it is like the one part of the film that I actually laughed out loud. When you watch Conan the Barbarian have this wrestling match slash fight with this wizard that has a Halloween quality lizard mask put over his head, it is almost laugh out loud funny. Unfortunately, the rest of the movie's not like that, and it's not one of those movies that's so bad it could be good. If it were like that all the way through, it would be great. You could crack open a beer and just enjoy it. But no, it's just that one scene that's quite that bad. The rest of it's got cringy humor and whatnot, but it just doesn't land, and it's not quite bad enough to just get a belly laugh out of it. But if I had to give this a star rating, it didn't age well, and even accounting for the fact that it's probably made for a 12-year-old, I would give this 1.5 stars. Yeah, I would agree with 1.5 stars. It doesn't quite hit 2 stars because at times you feel like shutting it off or fast forwarding it, but it's got enough weird stuff going on to keep me watching for the most part. So yeah, 1.5 stars. Whereas I would have given the other one, the first movie, I would have given it straight up 3 stars, no question. This is half of that, 1.5 stars. And yeah, it still deserves to be rotten, even though I can excuse a lot of it. Even by 1984 standards, it's quite rotten. Compare this, for example, to James Cameron's The Terminator, also from the same time period with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And if you put those side by side, yeah, this is still rotten, even adjusting for the time period and people's tastes. Let's move down 1.5 stars, December 2019. Conan the Destroyer took everything good about its predecessor and dumped it in the trash. As a matter of fact, it took everything good about every movie and threw it in the trash. You may think it's one of those movies that's so bad it's entertaining, right? Wrong. It's not that kind of terrible. It's the worst kind of terrible. It's the kind that you feel willing to give anything so you could take back the 2 hours you spent watching this. Yeah, it's not quite 2 hours. It's like 1 hour and 41 minutes. But it can feel about like 2 hours because there's, back in the 80s, there were movies that they wasted a lot more time than a modern movie would on getting from point A to B. You see that in TV shows from the time period, and you see that in films. In a modern movie, no matter what kind of movie it is, action, sci-fi, fantasy, historical drama, modern movies, they don't expect the audience to see so much movement from one place to the next. This one does, but it's a product of its time like that. The reason I say there's problems with this, it's not that. It's just that a lot of it is just like 12-year-old type logic, and it aged very poorly in the visual way. You had Conan and whatnot going through interior stone passageways, and they're carrying torches, and it's not explained why the torches, no matter if the torches are lit or not lit, it doesn't have any effect on the lighting of the interior stone caverns and whatnot. And that's kind of something a 12-year-old might accept, but an adult won't. And this movie, like I said, it feels like something marketed for kids, but it's got a little bit too much sexiness with the girls and their outfits, and it's got some sexual humor, like it goes right up to the edge of being, outright sexual humor without quite going over the edge. And it's got like a PG rating, and it really tries to do everything with that PG rating, meaning sometimes you see a little bit of blood under a body, or you see blood on sword blades, for example, but you don't see outright blood splashing around until the final sequence of the movie, where it's mostly blood from a giant monstrous creature. It's trying, you could say it's for kids, but it's just a little bit too gross sometimes, and there's a few sexual jokes that are a little bit too much for kids. Otherwise, it could be right out of a Saturday morning cartoon plot, no problem. Let's move on. 2 stars, December 17. All the violence and extremism of the first movie is set aside in this silly sequence that invests in a more talkative Conan. It has some stunning scenarios and nothing more. Yeah, I'll agree Conan has a lot more dialogue in this than the first movie, and I'll also just straight out tell you that I noticed, having a lot of stuff in hindsight, that between the first and second movies, it's obvious that Schwarzenegger practiced a lot on his English speech skills. There's no question about that, and they probably wanted to take advantage of that and give him more lines. But unfortunately, in this film, the bulk of the extra lines of dialogue that he has, he's delivering it as a drunken barbarian. Most of it is when he's drunk in one capacity or another, so it could be funny, but it's not quite timed right and written right, so it's not funny. It just comes across as really childish and stupid. But most of Schwarzenegger's dialogue, Conan is merely drunk, and he's got a lot of dialogue that makes him seem dumb, even though the lines are delivered very well. It's delivered in a deliberate fashion to make Conan look of low intelligence. That's a deliberate thing of this director, which isn't a problem. Conan's not supposed to be smart. The other characters, there are other characters involved, just like the first movie, and it's one of those other characters that's supposed to make up for the lack of intelligence, but that kind of fails too, unfortunately. That's one thing that failed more on this movie too. The side characters were better in the first movie, and they had attributes that kind of complemented and shored up Conan's deficiencies. And in this one, there's one character that's like a comedic character that's always delivering what are supposed to be funny lines and funny jokes, but they never quite work. They're just a little bit too dumb. I guess they would work for a young kid. It's that type of humor, but it doesn't work for even a teenager. There is one character that returns from the first movie, and in the first movie he was simply called Wizard, and he didn't have a name. In this one he's actually still Wizard, but he actually has a name. His name is Akiro. I believe it's Akiro, and Akiro, and they actually make it a point to tell you that that's his name in this. But in the first film, he was just called Wizard, and he's played by that same Asian American actor. And that's the funny thing about Wizards too. Wizards feature much more in this than they did in the first film, and yet the Wizards, they don't really have visible magic. Their powers mostly consist of telekinetic type powers that have no visual effects to go along with them. And there's like an actual duel of the wizards where they're largely grunting at each other while they try to open or close close a doorway of sorts, and there's just like a whole lot of grunting going on between them, no special effects, and it's obvious they didn't have the budget to put proper special effects for the wizards. So it's kind of wizards in name only. You just kind of have to use your imagination to supply the actual wizard effects, if it were. Um, let's move on. 2 stars. Yeah, 2 stars, no violence, a total disappointment. Yeah, it's all the violence that a PG movie could muster, very little. Most of the violence is actually directed towards a gigantic, disgusting looking beast at the end. And it's, the rest of it, for example, Conan fighting other barbarian type guys. Yeah, it doesn't really work because by today's action standards, it's not action. It's a whole lot of just pretend action, like something that you would see on a Saturday morning cartoon. It feels very much like that. Let's move on. I'm not going to entertain 4 or 5 star reviews because I can't believe in that. This is Rotten Reviews, and it's going to be 3 star and below only. So here's a 3 star review from August 22nd. Conan movie that mixed in slapstick and with its story, which also copied the tried and true formula of a whole gang getting together to complete a mission. I mean, this movie had everything: beautiful princess, muscled warrior, dumb sidekick, nasty killer, etc., and all winds up with a Star Wars ending at the end. Whoa, boy. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. It's like you're on a series of missions to go from one mission to the next and then defeat the big boss at the end. But that's not the real flaw here. The real flaw here is just that it's done in a 12-year-old type way. And there are logical fails, plot fails. For example, the evil queen in this, she kind of tells the audience and she's telling another character, but she's basically telling the audience what her evil plan is right from the beginning. And there's a real logical problem with this because she's telling this evil plan right over a girl that couldn't possibly be asleep, and she's just announcing her evil plan right in front of her. And, in the logical way, this girl would have heard everything that the queen said and that would have blown the whole plot out of the water. But in this movie, she just closed her eyes, and 1 second later she's so deeply asleep that the queen can just deliver this big dialogue exposition dump on what her whole evil plan is, which involves killing this princess. But of course the princess was asleep instantly, so she couldn't hear any of that. Really dumb. There's another part of this where Akira, or the wizard, he is, Conan said, for some reason, Conan knows where he is, I guess where he lives, and so they go to get him first before they go on an actual mission. And when we find Akira, this wizard character, he's been attacked and taken captive by these cannibal-like savages who are going to roast him on an open pit and eat him. And never mind the fact that the savage cannibals are completely over-the-top campy, and their design and outfits are ridiculous, and they behave in campy ways, and they're almost but not quite laugh out loud funny, these cannibals. But even putting that aside, there's no logic here, because if this wizard, and Conan says he came because he needs this wizard's ability, he can't complete the missions without this wizard. Well, this wizard really, he's shown to be incompetent and not even capable of defending himself from these cannibals that decided to attack his home or his homestead or whatnot. So he's kind of shown to be kind of an incompetent and wizard without power, so to speak. So why would Conan think he needs him? Actually, Wizard doesn't really have powers. He only conveniently uses some mumbo-jumbo powers when the plot needs him to, and the rest of the time he's pretty much just a guy going through the motions and grunting a lot. Really bad on the plot logic there, but for some reason Conan just couldn't do anything without him. Yeah. One star, May 16, 2019. Everything that was likable in the first Conan movie is absent in the sequel. None of the acting is particularly good. Whatever semblance of camaraderie between the characters is gone. And while the plot of the first movie was somewhat generic, the sequel's replacement swapped a spirited revenge film filled with self-interested bros with a general do-the-right-thing quest carried out by typical D&D characters without real personality. I agree 100%. This is like characters out of a generic Dungeons and Dragons quest, but put into the Conan world. And you know, it's interesting, right from the beginning, this film disregarded the ending of the first one. In the end of the first one, Conan is seen having conquered his kingdom. He's sitting on his throne. He's thrown the bad guy's head down the steps of the throne. And, you know, the narrator says, well, Conan went on to rule over his kingdom and et cetera, and that's a story for another day. Well, in this one, it opens up Conan's forget everything that happened in the first one. Conan is just, you know, a meager adventurer out trying to steal things and go on adventures, and forget all about that he like conquered a kingdom or any of that stuff, because this movie just disregards how the other one ended completely, and Conan's just back to zero, back to his starting point, back to the starting point of the board game, so to speak. And his sidekick is this petty thief character that's like a comedic sidekick. And it's like the first movie never even happened, and the dialogue is a lot dumber, like 12-year-old type dialogue, and the action scenes are like a 12-year-old cartoon's action scenes, a cartoon made for 12-year-olds and under. Yeah, it's very disappointing. If you were to watch these back to back, it's going to be pretty hard to sit through the second one. The first one I haven't seen in a very long time, many years. The first one's worth watching. Just skip this one because this one's really going to make you angry if you just finished the other one. One star, March 9th. This is almost a good movie. It tried to be a family flick, and it suffered for it. If Conan had been like he was in the pulp novels, the end could have been the same, because the princess could have been a virgin or couldn't have been a virgin. Still an okay watch, but Conan the Barbarian and Red Sonja are better films. Well, I don't know about Red Sonja. I'm pretty sure that's a rotten one, because even back in the day, I don't think I could sit all the way through it, even when it was new out on cable in the 80s. So I'm going to beg to differ on that one. But yeah, just if you watch the first Conan the Barbarian, just forget about this one. This one is really going to make you mad. As far as the virgin princess story, it's very cliched, like something taken straight up like D&D. And, you know, the virgin has to be sacrificed at the end to some nasty god, and she's got to remain a virgin. And this film actually spends some time giving you some jokes about that, where she's asking the different characters about the birds and the bees, so to speak. And the movie wants to cross the line and go more with that, but it can't, because it still wants to be a family movie. But it goes all the way up to the line, but doesn't quite cross it. And of course, she remains a virgin because the film director, he was smart. He had Conan too drunk to do anything. During the only scenes where he would have had the opportunity to do something with the virginal princess, he's just drunk and passes out. So that's the way he gets around having some kind of thing going on there. Kind of smart in that way. March 1, 2019, 1 stars. Ugh, this movie. The first one is a fantasy masterpiece from the soundtrack to Arnold Sucker punching a camel, but this movie, 3 words best describes it: stink, stank, and stunk. Yeah, exactly. All the stuff in the first one, there are some callbacks to things, like, for example, Arnold punches the camel in the first one. Well, there's a scene in this one where he's in the same set, the exact same place as he was in the first one when he punched the camel, and you can tell it's the exact same set piece, except it's during the day on this one, and he goes up to the camel and he apologizes for what happened before, and then the camel spits on him, and then he punches it, or he kind of bonks it over the head, and then they move on. And it's kind of a callback to the first one, but it's done in a campy, slapstick way. It doesn't work, and it's just one of those little things that's going to offend you if you just got off seeing the first one and you enjoyed the first one. This is really going to rub you the wrong way. And it has other plot problems. For example, yeah, there's modern dialogue in this. In particular, with the slapstick thief character, A lot of his jokes, not a lot of them, but there's quite a number of his jokes that have modern words thrown in and modern euphemisms put in to make the joke. And the jokes aren't even funny. Like in particular, he makes a joke about how they're thieves. They're not part of a charitable institution. Charitable institution, that's words he uses. And also he makes the, well, my cousin's sister's brother joke. He makes that a few times. There, my cousin's sister's brother told me there's a way, actually a back door into this castle under this waterfall. My cousin's sister's brother. Come on. And it's like they're trying to make him the comedic sidekick, but it just doesn't work. You're just rolling your eyes at the type of humor. Now, I don't know, maybe if you're 9 or 10 years old, it was funny in 1984, but I wasn't that young at the time. So for me, it was even eye-rolling to me as a 13 going on 14-year-old back then. I was just like, right, whatever. 2.5 stars, February 26. It's about as poor of a step back as you can take. This is what happens when you take a hard-edged popular movie and water it down for a kiddie audience. It happened to RoboCop, it happened to Terminator, so I guess it had to happen to Conan. Actually, it didn't happen to Terminator. Yeah, you're really mistaken on that. The Terminator films got really bad in a lot of different ways, but it wasn't that they turned into kiddie movies. But I'll agree on RoboCop certainly, and on Conan certainly. Yeah, RoboCop, that's one we really should discuss one of these days. The same thing happened to that. The first one was a serious adults movie, had a hard edge, if you will, to it, and then it became a straight-up toy merchandise, campy, ridiculous spoof of itself. And that's what this movie did, and it's going to rub you the wrong way if you took the first one serious. Let's move on. 3 stars, May 23rd, 2018, so we're back into the summer of last year. Despite this movie, until having some good parts, overall it could be better made. They're saying it could be better nude. Well, the first one did have some nudity in it. This one doesn't. It kind of just has some little bit of sexiness, but it really needed to be a family movie, so don't think you're going to see any actual nudity in this. You're not. But in the first one, there is at least one scene where there is outright nudity. The movie is good until about halfway down, but after the story begins to get very complicated, the characters begin to change their personality, and the special effects become worse. But the movie also has a lot of strong characters. The characters were good, the actors were good, the soundtrack was incredible, the sound mix was fabulous, and the story was very good. After all, I recommend this movie. Wow, are you working for somebody that had a stake in this thing, in the reputation of it? Because I completely disagree on that. The actors, the characters, the soundtrack, they were all really bad. The soundtrack was kind of like a callback to the first one, but done very, very cheaply. It felt like a TV version of the Conan soundtrack. Again, something a 12-year-old wouldn't really notice, but if you compare this soundtrack to the first one, this one's definitely like ripped off from the first movie, but it's kind of like, done in a Saturday morning cartoon type of way, and it shows. So I don't know what this guy's talking about. 2 stars, January 8, 2018. This is a bad sequel to a great film. This film switches the tone, and it is one of its many problems. You can file it under so bad it's good nowadays. Some cheap-looking special effects and some terrible acting compound this dreary sequel. Yeah, it's like it went from hero to zero, and it still has Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he still looks like Conan, but everything around him tells you you're in like a 12-year-old, made for 12-year-olds cartoon on Saturday morning. Yeah, 2.5 stars, January 1, 2018. Wolfie, What is Best in Life? Part douche. Yeah, 2 stars, September 21, 2017. We've jumped back 3 years in time now. Well, not quite 3 years, but 2 years and a few months back in time. 2 stars, pretty dull sequel with a boring, predictable story. The action was okay, I suppose nothing great. There was too many supporting cast when it should be Conan and Conan only. They made the tone lighter and put more humor in it, and it didn't work 90% of the time. But I did laugh when the camel from the first came back again to get revenge on Conan and ended up getting knocked out again. Nothing memorable, and only watch if you're a fan of the first. No, if you're a fan of the first, please don't watch this. You're going to be angry. Just forget this happened. But if you're not a fan of the first and you just thought the first was weird and you want to see more weird, sure, watch this. You might get a few laughs at some of the bad visual effects. Again, just fast forward to the part where they go to that ice crystal palace on the island and fight the wizard. And yeah, that's like 90% of the really laugh out loud funny visual effects go on there. The rest of it is just like, kind of just dumb. 3 stars, March 8, 2017. Let us be honest here. Hollywood nor any entertainment medium has not been able to recreate Howard's world of Conan or King Kroll. I watched this movie and its predecessor, and I know there is more to that grand world than what is on the screen. The fault lies not on the actors and director, but the creative teams who could not project Howard's genius on screen. But it is a noble intent nevertheless. It is a decent action film and worth the watch. Someday Hollywood or other media will get the Hyperborean age. Yeah, it is true. Every Conan type project that Hollywood has tried to do has pretty much failed. That includes even the film with Jason Momoa. Wasn't considered a success. Red Sonja, a complete dud even back in the 80s. I could barely sit through it back then, and I was the target audience back then. So yeah, it is kind of weird how it's just been failure after failure. Maybe someday in the future somebody will turn that all around, but right now, yeah, that is a true statement from 2017. February 27, 2017, not as good as the first one, but still passable. No, it's not passable. Please don't believe what they're telling you. If you enjoyed the first one, do not watch this unless you are already drunk and expect to find the problems. 1.5 stars, February 5, 2017. I am watching all of Arnold's movies in order. This is number 6. To be fair, this is no worse than Conan the Barbarian and actually might be slightly better. Really? Okay. It's still pretty cheesy and poorly acted, but I gave it an extra 0.5 star for all the horse punching. Well, yeah, if you really thought the first one was crap, then I guess this isn't that much of a step down for you. But if you really enjoyed the first one and took it serious like I did back in the day, then this one, yeah, it's pretty insulting. So I guess, yeah, if you're just looking for a Terminator 2, then yeah, both of these Conan movies are no good. Of course, they don't compare to. They don't even compare even in the same realm as Predator, for example. So yeah, if your standards, if your bar is high on Schwarzenegger, then yeah, both of these movies are crap. 3 stars, September 22nd, 2016. Wow, we're quite a while back in time. This movie is a sequel to Conan the Barbarian. This movie doesn't have the best reviews, really. But I actually enjoyed it. I liked the characters, and I also enjoyed the action scenes. I was very impressed with the feisty and brave character Zula, played by Grace Jones. Yeah, but Grace Jones, she's kind of funny, and I was going to mention something else. If you want to see something kind of weird, something that's different from what would happen in a modern movie, Grace Jones is wearing very little. Basically, she's wearing a bikini. Basically, she's wearing a thong, if you really want to look at it closely, and I did. The thing about this is, since it's still a family movie, what they did is they put Grace Jones in a thong, and then when her back's to the camera, they concealed her butt crack by putting like a furry like fox tail on her rear. So there was this furry tail. You couldn't tell if it was from a fox or if it was from like some other furry creature, but it could have been it wasn't a raccoon, so I'm just going to say it was a fox's tail. They put a fox's tail hanging off her thong bikini so that it would cover her butt crack when she did happen to show it to the camera. And that's so that this could remain a family film. But it's funny. In one scene, they have to swim underwater, and when she comes out of the water, she actually has to wring out the fox's tail. And when she does, she kind of shakes her butt a little after she wrings out the fox's tail. And they actually put a little piano flourish on the score to try to put a cartoonish flair on her shaking the water off her tail. Now, that's in a movie from 1984, a family type movie. Now, if this had been done today and she had been in that same outfit, not only would we've gotten full butt shots from her, but probably she would have been cast just for her butt, and they would have taken full advantage of that, and it would have had to have been PG-13, of course, or worse. And so it kind of highlights the difference between a Conan of today and tomorrow, or today and yesteryear. And yeah, because today Grace Jones wouldn't even have been put in there because she's very flat-chested in this, almost like a stick figure. And even for back in the day, her butt wasn't that great. So in this one, she'd have gigantic everything all the way around. You can guarantee that. And just it's kind of interesting to see how, you know, they did it differently back then to try to keep it a family movie. Very inventive, the foxtail, but really kind of off-putting and stupid when she came out of the water and kind of had to wring it out. Anyway, something interesting there because there wasn't a whole lot interesting in this film. 1.5 stars, June of 2016. Weak sequel has our hero leading a princess on a journey. The action is slow. Yeah, but you do get to see Schwarzenegger fight a wizard in a rubber lizard mask, and that's almost laugh out loud funny, so you might want to see that. 2 stars, February 5, 2016. A perfect example of what happens when someone takes a work of cinematic art and tarnishes it with a sequel that is more comical and is very cowardly in its depiction of the cruel world it takes place in. Yeah, it's not only not a cruel world anymore. The first movie, it showed you that the world was a very cruel and unforgiving place all the way around, and Conan himself was very cruel and unforgiving, no question. And this one, everything's lighthearted, it's a family film, and not only is the world very safe and bloodless for the most part, and very much like a Saturday morning cartoon adventure, but also Conan is very much more like a nice guy and very, very much not the cruel person he was in the first one. And also, I might want to tell you that this world is very much smaller than the first one because it doesn't have the budget. When the characters go from one setting to the other, for example, when they go from the desert to the forest and the mountains, and to the ice palace out on the island. This happens very quickly, and it happens so quickly in the film that it feels like almost like something out of World of Warcraft, where you just like walk for a minute or two and you go over the hill and now you're from the forest into the desert all of a sudden. It was very much like a video game type of geography, and the world feels very small and safe. And in the first movie, the world felt more epic and big and very unforgiving and harsh, just not the type of world you would want to find yourself in. Quite a stunning difference between this one and the last one. 2 stars. This sequel got stuck up way too far its own ass. It is less giddy, has less story, more dialogue. Actually, they're trying to say it's less gritty, has less story, more dialogue, and some really bad costumes. Even the final fight didn't work, so there is not a lot to wait for. Yeah, the costumes, I'll say there are a few things that don't make sense. Like there's a village that's shown to just be a lot of villagers standing around in some kind of smoky canyon that looks more like a rock quarry, and that's supposed to be some kind of village. And it doesn't make any sense. And then when you look at the characters' costumes, these villagers, it looks like they just pulled people off the street, paid them $50 for the day, and just had them pick their own stuff from some warehouse of props. And they've got weird stuff on their bodies. Some of them are like girls walking around. Villagers are walking around with chainmail shirts, and like other people, like guys, old men, are walking around with what look like some kind of copper pots on their heads as helmets. It's like really bizarre, and I guess if you're drunk it would be funny, but you can tell that like it's just extras pulled off the street and stuck into a hodgepodge of costumes that could have been from a lot of different productions, just pulled out of the warehouse, and no thought or anything to it. And yeah, a village is just like a bunch of villagers standing around in some smoky rock looking areas. There's no logic to it at all, and it's a complete fail from set design to costume design. But if you're, again, like you're under the age of 12, it's completely passable, and in a Saturday morning cartoon it would be completely workable. 2 stars, January 3rd, 2016. Neither the quest nor the characters get any sort of explanation. Yeah, they're very cardboard. They expect you to have watched the first one to understand Conan and the Wizard, but they're still cardboard. They're just cardboard copies of their characters from the first one. and the sidekick, he comes out of nowhere and he's not explained. He's just some guy that happens to be with Conan. Why Conan puts up with him, I don't know. He's just like a ridiculously nonsensical side character that's worth nothing, but he's supposed to be the comedic action or comedic relief. Problem is, he's just not funny, at least not for anybody older than 12. So let's move down 2 stars, December 9th, 2015. Let down by lackluster supporting characters and a weaker story, Conan the Destroyer lacks the grit and intensity of its predecessor in favor of a more family-friendly adventure movie. Yeah, family-friendly, and it just, I'm going to say if the comedy actually worked, if the comedy, as dumb as it was, actually worked and people laughed and the adults in the family laughed, this probably wouldn't be that rotten. It probably would have been passable back in the day, but it's just that the comedy, even when they're really trying hard, it just doesn't work. So you're just rolling your eyes at it anyway. 2.5 stars, August 29, 2015. A fairly fun fantasy movie with rubber suit monsters and plenty of great set pieces, aimed a bit more towards children than the first movie, but still some fun. Yeah, and the logic of Conan's logic is like a child's logic. Like, let's just say there's a scene in which he has to break about a dozen different mirrors. And because behind one of the mirrors is the wizard that he's fighting. Okay, fine. But then when he's broken every mirror except for 2 mirrors that are opposite each other in this big circular chamber, instead of just like going ahead and breaking the next 2, because one of them's going to have the wizard, he has to stop and look around all frantically and look at between both of these possibilities on both ends of the room. And he says, which one is it? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Like, and it's supposed to be tension or something. Well, what good does it do guessing which one has the wizard? It doesn't mean anything. Just break both of them. You're going to get the wizard. And it's stuff like that where I guess if you're younger than 12, that's some kind of tension or a big dilemma. But it wasn't, because the wizard is just standing there behind the glass with nothing else to do. So who cares which one you break first? It's just like childlike, and if you're 8 years old, great, but I don't know. It's just like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work on any other level. June 2nd, 2015, 2.5 stars. This movie's watchable, but it feels like the kids' version of the first one. Yeah, and it's a really bad kids' version of the first one. 2.5 stars, May 28, 2015. Worth to watch for the camp and Grace Jones. This is 80s bad cinema, and it's oh so good. Well, not really. It's just not funny enough to be laugh out loud funny. You're just going to roll your eyes. It just doesn't give you the effect. And Grace Jones, no. Grace Jones was, something to look at in some films back in the day, but not in this one. In this one, there's nothing sexy about her. She's like, and they didn't want her to be. They made sure there was nothing to see sexually about her, nothing appealing for an adult, because this had to be PG. It was for kids. So it's kind of odd, also because some of the generic priestess characters that are in the palace of the evil witch, the evil queen, their costumes are kind of sexy, but it makes sure that they're far away from the camera so you can't get a good close look at them. They tried really hard to like show the adults that people had sexy outfits on, but then always make sure the camera was positioned where you couldn't get a good look at it. I'll give the director credit for that. He kept his PG rating. 2.5 stars, February 4, 2015. While praying at an altar with his traveling companion and fellow thief Malik, Conan is confronted by Queen Taramis of Shadizar, who tests the pair in combat with several of her guards. She tells him that she has a quest for him, but he initially refuses her until she uses her power to learn his greatest desire, his beloved Valeria. Promised Valeria's resurrection, Conan agrees to the quest, which is to escort the queen's niece. Yeah, it's very much like an episode of Dungeons & Dragons, a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, and it just right from the start just hand waves away everything that happened in the first film and sets all the characterization of Conan back to zero and makes him a cardboard cutout character. The only thing that's the same is his body. Yeah, let's just call this one. I've said everything I think I need to say. Plot holes, but the plot holes I could pick out, they're not really plot holes if you're shooting for a 12-year-old or under audience. But the adults in the room needed to find something to laugh at, and they didn't. They just would eye roll this whole thing, even back in 1984. I know, I was there. So, yeah, if you're a fan of the first one, just watch that one. Don't hurt yourself by watching this one. Unless you want to go straight to that ice palace scene on the island, just to get the full effect of all the bad CGI and how low budget it was, just skip right to that scene. And I'm going to say 38% on the audience score is fair, but you know, if it dropped to 12%, it would still be fair. 26% on the tomato meter, yeah, it's fair. I don't know. Anything in the 20s on both of those is probably fair. There is some redeemable value in here. Also, your mileage might vary. If you're a little bit drunk, maybe it's a little bit more enjoyable, but I'm not going to guess that it is. It's just a possibility at this point. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and I'm going to thank you for watching. If you're actually still watching this, who knows? Maybe I'm just talking to myself. But in any case, I will see you again, hopefully, on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.